Okay, and welcome to another episode of AWS on Stack Overflow. Let a few people come and join us here. As always, would love to hear from you where you are in the world. We've had people on previous episodes coming from Argentina, India, Bermuda, I think it was, or the Virgin Islands. Hey, you like the shirt? Actually. Again, have you tried turning it on and back off again? It, of course, deserves a reference to the original thing. On and off again. Let's see if we can get this working. 2 million views on this fellow. Oops, no sound coming through. Let me do some magic over here. Ooh. Oh well, I was going to show you the video, but I don't have sound working on there at the moment. And of course, the phrase "Have you tried turning it on and off again?" has been made famous by the IT crowd. Have you tried turning it on and off again? Oh, and I should point out this lady here. Don't know. Texas. G'day. I don't know if you recognize this lady, who is the head of tech support on this particular show. But I was recently watching a show called Humans. Humans is an English show about what happens if robots become sentient. And it's pretty good, especially the first couple of seasons. And sure enough, she is one of the lead characters in the show Humans. So highly recommend you try and track down this show. There she is. Fantastic. IMDb, by the way, is an excellent place to go and look for movies. Do you know who owns IMDb? Quick quiz. Who owns IMDb? If we scroll to the bottom of the page, oh, what do you know? It's an Amazon company. They figured, hey, if you want a good index of movies and things, the best place to get it is from the Internet Movie Database, which has a fantastic collection of who created shows or who the actors are, etc. And if you watch Amazon Prime, if you subscribe to Prime on AWS and you watch an episode, I've almost finished watching Man in the High Castle, and when you're watching an episode I'll skip over the ad, there's this thing called X-ray. And X-ray shows you who or what is in a particular scene. So when you have a show here, for example, it's showing me the actor that is currently in this scene. If I jump ahead to a different scene, it's showing me who that actor is. So really nice stuff, and that is powered by IMDb. There you are. Learn something every day. Got people from Texas. Where else we're coming from? So, for those of you who haven't joined us before, this is AWS on Stack Overflow. My name is John Rotenstein. I'm a technical evangelist or developer advocate. Got to use the right name at AWS, and I help developers use AWS. And one of the things I do on the side is I answer lots of Stack Overflow questions. So, according to the stats on my Stack Overflow page, I have provided over 5,000 answers on Stack Overflow, all about AWS, and I've reached 5.5 million people. My mother must be so proud of me. And what else is interesting in here? I can also, it says I'm in the top 0.1% of people this year. What does that mean? It means of all the people who have scored on Stack Overflow, who score reputation, I am currently the 72nd for the year. So woohoo, because I've earned 28,000 reputation. And if I want to say all time, I'm 551st all time reputation earner on Stack Overflow. So it's done mostly over the last 5 years. So you too can be a Stack Overflow contributor. You get reputation on Stack Overflow for doing various things. What is reputation? Asking questions, answering questions, and editing. And you earn things if your question is upvoted, which means it's a good question. If your answer is upvoted, which means it's a good answer. If the person who asked the question accepts your answer, which means, yep, that was the solution for me. You get upvotes. Oh, I've never noticed this. Apparently, the person who accepts the question also gets 2 points. And that's because a lot of people don't bother to accept a question. And a lot of people on Stack Overflow who are early answering questions get annoyed that their question is not, it doesn't get this little tick on there. For example, if I go out and look at a Stack Overflow question and look for one that has been ticked. These are all true. Here's one. So this little answer here gets a little tick of approval, which means the owner accepted the answer as the best answer. And they can take it away. They can assign it to somebody else if they think another one is the better answer. But it gives 2 points to the person who put the tick on there to say thank you for doing that. Edits. You'll see me editing questions a lot as well. That earns some points. And you can do a bounty. A bounty is where you say, I really, really would like this question answered. And you can put an additional score in there. So you might say, I'll give a bonus 100 points to somebody who gives me an answer to this question. So the person putting that on donates their 100 reputation to a person who then receives it if they're answered correctly. Brads, would you mind pasting your search query in chat so we can see the same list you're working from? So if you go to this bit.ly link, I've got a whole lot of things on there. Let's have a look what I've got in my bit.ly link. AWS on Stack Overflow. So this is where I try to update a few resources of things to look at. So this is what I use. I use this one. It's called Search for Newest AWS Questions Without an Accepted Answer. And it's quite simple. I just say, find me something with an Amazon or AWS tag where has accepted answer is false. And I sort it by the most recent question. And that's how I do it. And each day several times a day, I just go through looking for questions that I have not answered myself. What else do we have on this page? We've got the AWS chat room. So I invite you all, come and join our chat room. Put that in the chat here. And this is where several of us who answer AWS questions hang out, and sometimes people pop in and ask additional questions. It's always good though to have questions on Stack Overflow itself, but we can carry on some further conversations here. Here's somebody saying, hey, I've got this question. No one's wanted to answer it for me. Can you pop in and provide me an answer? And did anyone give them an answer? No, because I have no idea what they were asking. What else do I have on this page? I've got some useful Stack Overflow reporting. Let's have a look at this. Questions by month. How many questions? So Stack Overflow has an SQL system where you can run queries and go across their data store. So I can have a look at how many questions there are each month since 2019. Looks like I wrote in this query. So we can see that questions, we exclude the most recent month, it's partial. So it's always increasing. It's been a big recent month. Answer rate, 58%. The answer rate improves over time because some questions that don't receive answers, that were downvoted or marked as closed, get removed from the system. So the number of unanswered questions goes down, so the answer rate goes up. The accepted rate, this is pretty bad. So of the questions that are asked out there, while 60% or so get answers, only about a quarter get accepted. So that's where we'd love people to click that accepted button a bit more often to reward the person asking the question. So any of you out there do answering or asking on Stack Overflow? Oftentimes you will find yourself doing a Google search, S3 cross bucket copy, let's say. If I do a Google search for something here, you'll typically find Stack Overflow. What do we hear? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the fifth answer here is a Stack Overflow thing. If you ever come to Stack Overflow and you find that a question has helped you in some way, I highly invite you to come and tick the up arrow. So this one is something about AWS Sync. That's amazing. In 2013, they just introduced a command line interface for copying between buckets. That's before my time. So if that was handy to you, you can just come in and tick the up arrow. That gives the author a bit of a ooh feeling, and they answer more questions. Monkey Monkey, as I do a lot of reading on Stack Overflow. Oh yeah, Stack Overflow is a great place to learn. And they often say the best way to learn is to teach. So I found that by answering questions on Stack Overflow, I learn a lot of things myself. So I have lots of topics to talk about this week, but let's start by having a look at some recent questions. I was checking them on the train as well, coming into work just now. For me, it's 10 a.m. on Thursday morning in Sydney. The future is looking bright. Instant Max says, I did a lot of reading when I was learning Python. Whenever I'm doing a programming language, I'm continually going out there. So Python, here's one. How to remove unprintable characters in Python. And sure enough, the first answer was suitable. And somebody wants to strip non-printable characters from a string. That's way too hard. I just came up with a list comprehension that did it better. Yeah, this is pretty good. This is saying, never used a filter command in Python. It's saying allow only include characters that are in string printable, which is a part of the string library. I've never used filter before. Got to learn something there. Okay, let's see what we can do out here. So I always go through, look at the headings, try to find some questions that are interesting in some way that I can lend my support to. I'll jump to some that I saved earlier to save us the trouble of going through. Reputation, I want my bookmarks. If you go to a question in Stack Overflow, you'll find this little bookmark icon on the side, and that allows you to mark it to come back to later if you wish. Now, I mark this one for some reason. Unable to add an event notification to S3 trigger Lambda. That's what I wanted. Notice here that they've got Lambda misspelled. I mentioned before that you can edit questions. So Wikipedia is not just, Stack Overflow is not just a question and answer site. It's like Wikipedia in that it's a wiki. And if you have a sufficient reputation, you can come in and edit questions. So in this case, I'm going to improve the spelling of the word Lambda. We have lots of things on Lambda today, actually. I'm having trouble to add event notification. I won't fix their spelling. Typo. It's as simple as that. So now other people who come to that question will have the correct heading. I don't think I know how to answer this question because they're using, what are they saying here? They're using CDK. I'm not a CDK person, so I'm a Python person. Unbookmark that. This was interesting. And it looks like it's already got an answer. Wow. Somebody answered it. I did some stats and I found that most answers on Stack Overflow get made, about 50% of them are within half an hour. So, within a couple of hours, most questions that are going to be answered have already received an answer. So this was interesting. I wanted to mention this question because somebody is saying they have an SQS policy that they're trying to grant things. So I'd like to allow an IAM user to perform SQS receive, delete, etc. on an SQS queue. I'm creating the stacking cloud formation, creating the queue, an SNS topic, IAM user, etc. But the queue policy fails to create and generates an error message. So if we look at their cloud formation template here, they're creating an IAM user, they're creating SQS queue, they're creating an SNS topic. They've got a policy for the IAM user to send emails via simple email service. And here's what they're talking about. They have a queue policy. And this queue policy is allowing on the queue, it's allowing the IAM user to find elsewhere in this template to call that SQS queue. So it's worth mentioning that SQS, whoops, I don't want S3S. I've got some shortcuts set up for all these services. SQS is one of the few services that actually has the ability to attach policies directly to resources. So if I go and create an SQS queue here, you can see attach policy. And the policy says this account can do anything in SQS. Basically, the account can assign other people permissions to use it, or you can add additional users who can do things in there. But the strange thing is this person asking the question wants to put permissions on the IAM user to access the queue. And the best way to really do that is to put the permissions on the IAM user and say that user is allowed to access the queue, rather than filling up your policy with lots of statements about individual users. So I came in here earlier today and I said, it's rather strange to add them in, and it's much better to add them directly, add them in IAM rather than adding it to the policy. An exception to that is cross-account permissions. So if you want a user in a different account to be able to push messages to your queue, that's when an SQS policy is really good. but they seem to have ignored me and they've just gone with somebody else's answer. Is there a script to set up IAM roles using the API? What do you mean, Monkey, by setting up IAM roles? So everything you do in AWS, you can do in 3 ways. You can do through the user interface, you can do through the CLI, and you can do through API commands. So, okay, if you want to set up an IAM role using that. So, for example, I use Boto3. Boto3 is the Python SDK for accessing AWS. I just went to the manual for IAM permissions in here, and there would be things like create role. So here is a command which will create a role. If you want to create a policy, so you could create a policy, you could then attach the policy to a role. So that's how you'd do lots of that. Let's have a look at them. One of them, if you create a policy, you just say, please create a policy for me. Here is the name. Here is the policy document. This is the hard bit. The policy document is the whole JSON policy that you want to do. So you've almost got to create your JSON policy externally, give it a test, and then you can put it in programmatically. I'm wondering if anyone has already made a script. Google is your friend. Let's have a look here. EC2 instance is not iterable. So this person was saying they went off and they retrieved an instance, and then they tried to iterate through the instances and check the tags, and it came up with an error saying EC2 instance is not iterable. Now, the answer is pretty obvious. In fact, somebody pointed out here that when you get an instance, it's one instance, and there's no need to iterate through those instances. But I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about something that's a little confusing with Python in AWS. And that is, there's 2 ways to do things in Boto3 when connecting to resources. And one of them is called this resource method. So what it's got here is it's got a command saying, oh, they're missing there. Oh no. Okay, they're saying I want to connect to EC2 and I want to retrieve a specific instance with an ID. It looks like this is a Lambda function, so a SAM local, something passed through the instance ID that they want to get from the event, and they're retrieving an object. And this creates a Python-like object. Let's give it a go. I can come in here. The thing I love about Python is you can type things interactively. So I might copy some of his code here, and let's have a look at my instances out there. And we'll start by using the resource method of connecting. So I have an instance here. I'll grab the instance ID. So instance equals Boto3 resource EC2 dot instance, and then I think I can just say ID equals that thing. And if I can spell it correctly, it would help. And I now have an object coming back in Python. And this object allows me to do various things to the object. So if I pop back into the EC2 Boto3 documentation, and I click on instance, it's showing me all the things that I can do with this instance object that I have created. And I can do things like I can get the launch time. So I could say EC2 inst.launch time. It comes back and tells me when my instance was launched. Or I could come back and say, what is my key name? So this is very Pythonic, that I've got an object. Ooh, got key name. Oh, my key name is called class. I thought it was returning a Python class, but my key name is actually called class. So this is a very Pythonic way of accessing things, that I've got an object and then I can access attributes, and I can even access methods on here. So I could say that I want to reboot this instance simply by saying inst reboot. And my instance is now being rebooted. If I have a look in my console and refresh, actually, I don't know if you see reboot appearing in the console, but that's what it's doing behind the scenes there. So that is the first way of accessing things. You use the resource when you create it. That's called Boto 3 with EC2. Oh yeah, you can do everything. In fact, when AWS first came out, there was no management console. You had to do everything programmatically through the API. Over time, they added the management console, which I see as a bit of a marketing thing, that people can understand it when they see things in the console, but real people do it programmatically. We need a shirt that says that. Real people do it with an API. Now, the other way, instead of saying Boto 3 resource, I can come in here and say EC2 client equals Boto 3 client for EC2. And then I can do things on that EC2 client, and I can say describe instance. And then go to this thing, describe instance. So I'm retrieving the instance. Describe instances. So it looks like it comes back with plural of them. So describe instances. And then I've got to come in here and say instance IDs equals, and it's a list. So I'll just put my thing in. I use a wonderful clipboard utility, which I'm always happy to promote. It's called Clip Menu. A little hard to find because I think the official site doesn't actually let you download it. It gives an error, but you'll find it elsewhere. And Clip Menu allows you to store your previous copies into your clipboard, and I can just pull down a little icon I've got in my taskbar, my menu bar, and I can retrieve past things. So not great for security because passwords might be observed, but fantastic for getting previous things. I can also save commonly used things that I type. For example, if I have, what have we got here? I want to show you passwords. My Git username, for example, I can just paste that in there and it comes up with it. So really, really useful. I also use it for inserting common answers to Stack Overflow questions. So if I was to go into Stack Overflow, my computer is not liking me at the moment. Thank you. Why is my keyboard unhappy with my computer? You tried turning it on and back off again. Okay, that's very interesting. I'm going to quit my web browser. Something is upsetting it. Thank you very much, Chrome. What are we going on here? You forgot the quotes. Okay, I'll fix that up. And you've clipped me. Fantastic. If I come into a question here, hey, that worked. And I want to give a standard answer. So I can just come in here and I might pull down my standard snippets and say, for tips on asking a good question, here's a good link. Or I can come in and say things like, S3 inventory can provide a daily or weekly list of CSV files of all your objects. So a really fast way of handling it. So I highly recommend using Clip Menu or a similar clipboard utility. What were we doing back here? I was saying instance IDs equals that thing. Now, when I call this as a client function in Python and put the quotes in as was recommended, we should see that it comes back as a huge list of JSON, and the JSON contains reservations, etc. If I go to the documentation, it actually shows me how the response comes back. So I've got reservations that contains instances, that contains instance IDs, etc. So I have to manipulate a whole lot of JSON. So if I wanted to get the key name that was out of there I did before, so I could say that now that my instance 2 equals that thing, then I've got to, oh, it's so hard, so hard. I can say instance ID, and then I've got to say in there's a field called reservations, and that comes back with a whole list of things which includes my instances things. So I can come back in and say, it then has instances, and then I go say, give me back the first instance that came back, and then give me the key name. And I forgot to put a loop in the reservations. So you can see how hard it is. So inst2 is now class. So saying go to this instance, go to the reservations, go to the instances, go to the key name, compared to just saying, hey, get me this object and return the key name. So the resources are a more Pythonic way of programming stuff. Hey Arturo, good to have you all back. Mexico. I do like Python. I do like Boto 3. The fellow who invented Boto 3 actually is Mitch Garnett, I think his name is. And a prolific writer and principal engineer at AWS. Look at that. He wrote Boto 3 on his own. So he wanted a Python library for the SDK. It wasn't available, so he wrote it himself. And then AWS came along and went, you know, that's so good. Do you mind if we make that the official SDK for Python? And later on, he came and joined AWS. So you can see he came, he left a bit and then he came back again. It's nice of him. So thank you, Mitch, for inventing Boto 3. Why is Boto 3 named that way? It derives its name from the Portuguese name given to dolphins native to the Amazon River. Isn't that interesting? We cover so much on this show. So yeah, just want to show this question. This person is using the resource method, which allows him to say, you know, I just want to loop through things, or dot tags, or dot volumes. All this is a way of saying, show me all the volumes attached to this instance. So much easier than manipulating all of that. Jason. Okay, let's have a bit of a break. I found an interesting website online recently, and I was thinking to myself, oh, what is the current world population? And I found this website. And what do we got here? I explore the world population from 1 CE to 2050. And in fact, they've got a video where they've pre-recorded it going throughout time. And I found this utterly fascinating, seeing where the world population is. So here is the early 250 CE. Each dot represents 1 million of people. And as we go through the Roman Empire, the Golden Age of India, we can see the world population spreading out. And you know, I'm down here in Australia. There was as good as not many people down there. You folks in the USA, looks like a bit of Mexican type things down in Southern California or something. It was mostly China and India, it looks like. And if we fast forward a lot, 1500 CE, Common Era, more and more population coming across there. We're starting to see lots of people coming out through Europe. Jump ahead a bit more. Modern Era, 1900, we can see, wow, lots of things around Europe. America starting to hit it off. But again, China and India, amazing. Indonesia, massive amounts. The Philippines, massive populations as well. We often don't appreciate how many people there are around there. And even Africa was a late entrance. A late entrance to where that was. The mobile game Plague, yes. You could easily take this as thinking it's where the viruses are now spreading. Talking of that, I don't know if I've given a plug to this in the past, but I'll mention again. I watched a TV show. It's available on Amazon Prime, at least in Australia. And not Contagion. That's a good movie for viruses. But I watched one called Counterpart. Counterpart is a TV series, only 2 seasons, unfortunately, with J.K. Simmons. And it's about some scientific experiment goes wrong. The world splits, and there's 2 worlds connected to each other. And what happens to the 2 worlds is they vary from each other and split apart. And one of them does actually get a virus. So as I walk into work these days wearing a mask over my face, I'm quite reminded of this show and what happens out there. Contagion was the other one out there, which apparently has had a lot of people watching it of late and got a lot of things right, including people running to supermarkets and trying to hoard lots of things. So you've probably already watched it lately. thank you, world population. That was a bit of fun. I'll show you something else I enjoy doing. This is my favorite thing. I play it with some friends online each day, and it's called Set. I'll put the link in here. It comes from a card game that I play at home, but it's a really fun thing. And what it is all of these symbols, there are 3 different colored symbols, green, red, purple. There's 3 different shapes. You've got diamonds, squigglies, and ovals. And you've got 3 different ways of filling things in. You've got empty, you've got shaded, and you've got solid. And the idea is to find sets of 3. And the rule is that the set of 3 cards, each of those elements, the color, the shape, and the filling in, has to be either the same or different. So if I look at this thing, I can quickly see that these 3 shapes here create a set because they're all solid, they're all different colors, and they're all different shapes. So every attribute has to be either all the same or all different. To give you an idea of where things are quite different, I will quickly look ahead and can't find any immediately. 333, 333. Here is another set of 3 with this red one because they're all shaded different colors, different shapes. Players have increased their score exponentially in the past 6 months. So from playing more, I actually have a spreadsheet set up with some previous people that I play the game with, and we record our scores every day, and we've got a scoring method where we figure out who the calculations are. So I'm currently winning this month's score, but it's amazing how quick you can get at one of these games. And let me find another example here, just so green. Okay, so this is an interesting one. This solid, no, I got it wrong. I'm under pressure. Green one, yellow. Oh well, hey, it's a good game. Some kind of voodoo. I fixed the spelling on that one. I fixed that one. We've looked at iterable there. I have another question here to look at. Prevent admin users. Oh, this is good. Prevent admin users from elevating their own permissions. I have several users who are part of an admin group in AWS and have full access to all the resources. I don't want them to elevate their permissions and add themselves to a group whenever they get stuck somewhere. Is there any way to have an IAM policy to prevent those users granting themselves elevated permissions? So I'm a little confused here in that he's saying that they have admins who have full access to everything, and he's worried about them giving themselves extra access to stuff. So I'm not too sure what's going on there. But this is a common problem. And as Parsifal here, isn't Parsifal a reference to Ready Player One? Great book. Movie's okay. Great book. Ready Player One. I should set up my own website here. Ready Player One. Set in the future when most people are logged into an online virtual world, but if you get killed in the online virtual world, you can never log back in again. And there are some clues hidden in the virtual world by the guy who made the virtual world that if somebody finds all the clues, they become the owner of the virtual world. So quite a fun book. Okay, Parsifal is saying this is a people problem. And it's true. How do you control access to various resources? So if you're an admin, you can do anything. If somebody blocks you, you can remove that block. Often the best way to do things is to put sensitive resources in a separate account. So let's say you've got some files relating to HR and you don't want IT administrators to access the HR resources. What you might do is create a separate AWS account, maybe create an S3 bucket, put the resources in there, and then be very careful about who has access to that separate account. So an admin in account 1 does not have access to everything in account 2. Another example is people are sometimes worried that somebody can accidentally or intentionally delete their data out of AWS. So it's very easy to launch instances in EC2. It's just as easy to delete them, just as easy to delete data from S3. So a common strategy people do is they will use same region replication on an S3 bucket to copy their data to another bucket in a different account. And no one should have permission to delete data from the main account and the backup account. So worst case, if somebody accidentally or intentionally deletes the data, there's a second copy of it and they can retrieve it again. Oh, Jelly mentions permission boundaries. We should talk about that as well. One other thing I wanted to mention, it slipped out of my mind, giving access to resources. Okay, we can talk about SCPs. AWS SCP, it's a permission boundary, isn't it? I had a look at this recently, actually, in my preparation for the security exam. So you can have multiple AWS accounts joined by AWS organizations. So you might have a master account, and then you might create an account for different departments, different teams, different projects. How do you assign permissions to all of those different accounts that are sitting underneath? And the answer is you can create, no, I'm thinking of an SCP in general. An SCP is a service control policy in general, is how you assign permissions to accounts. And you can say you can use EC2, you can't use EC2. Instead, a permission boundary is specifically for IAM, and it's a way of saying this person can do stuff, but they're limited by a boundary. So here is a policy that's saying grant anything in S3, anything in CloudWatch, and anything in EC2 to any resource. Highly dangerous. This person could just as easily delete things out of all those services. But when you use a policy to set the permissions for a user, it limits the user's permissions, but does not provide the permissions on its own. So here is an example. Is that going to be useful? Where you can say, this, allow people to create user, but it's too big. How can we cut down permissions? And here is the clue. You can give permissions in a policy, you can give permissions on resources, and you can give permissions on boundaries. And it's only the intersection of all these three things that work. Give me some examples. Okay, here's one. Oh boy. So this thing is saying, allow them to use any of these services, allow them to list users, allow people to manage their own policies, deny access to logs because you don't want people deleting logs because they might be trying to hack into the system. And so here's the way I visualize it. An IAM administrator can say, I want to create a user and give them lots of permissions. But if they themselves don't have the permission to create those permissions, they can't give somebody else the permission to create it. So there's this thing called a permissions boundary. And the permissions boundary defines what permissions they are allowed to use, and it forces them to add this condition onto policies they create that say, oh, by the way, all these permissions that I'm granting also limited by this particular permissions boundary, which might say you can't create users that can do too much. If they don't put this condition in, then the creation of the policy will fail because the user has a permission boundary attached to themselves. I didn't do a good job of explaining it, but that's basically what it means. You can create these permission boundaries, and users can only grant permissions that they themselves have been specifically permitted to grant. If that's interesting to you, I shall put that in chat. So another thing is I pointed out down here, there is a group in IAM. Instead of putting people in the administrators group, there is a policy called power user groups. So there's what do we got here? We've got an admins group, which has power user access. That's the one. And this power user access policy says, allow them to do anything that is not IAM. And they can do it on anything. So this effectively grants them permission to do anything in the account, but they can't do IAM things like creating other users and creating backdoors in there. Not perfect, because they can still access everything else in the AWS account, but they can't create IAM users in there, and IAM resources. So that might help. Assume roles. Oh yes, assume roles are another great way. So if you are an administrator and you have access to everything in AWS, it's often a good idea not to use your account day to day. And rather you should assume a role temporarily that has the higher permission. So I'm John, I might have the John account where I access my normal resources. And when I want to be John the admin, I can assume the additional role that I want within there. And you can do that through the management console. There's an easy way to assume a different role. And that is up. Switch role, here it is. And you can give it some credentials for a role switch role, so I can say I want it in my account. I'll put my account ID in here. I'm going to assume a role called ops role, which is for EC2. I might be able to assume it, and I want to be green. Well, let me switch to this role. Nope, I need a role that is not for EC2. I want security audit, lots of things in here. I would like one more role, please. Let's create one. I would like a role that allows me to access for S3. I would create an account. It's my account ID in. So what I'm trying to do is create a role that has limited options. So let's say I want to go in here and create a role that has S3 permissions, unlimited S3 permissions. Okay, I now go back to switch role and I say I want unlimited S3 permissions, switch role. The console will turn green because I selected green here as an icon. So you can see up here it's saying green, unlimited S3. I'm hiding that due to a plugin here. I'll show you what it normally looks like. So I'm unlimited S3 in my account. If I now try to go to EC2 using that role, it should give me lots of errors. I'm not authorized to access EC2, but I am authorized to access content in S3. And here I am, I can successfully access S3. So I'm temporarily assuming that role, and then I can say, I want to go back to my normal login. So a good way of doing it here is a normal person uses their normal account. When they want to do admin things, they temporarily assume the role through the console or through the API, do their magic, and then get out of it again. It's much the same as on Linux when you have the sudo command. So I might have, let's hop into a thing here, and I've got some dangerous directories. So I might go and try to create a file in the Cetra directory. And I don't have permission to create a file in here, but I could say sudo touch, not really appropriate to touch people there, and I could successfully create the file. I hope I didn't do anything wrong in there. I will get rid of that file. So just like sudo, whatever you pronounce it. Have you seen this one? XKCD, my favorite comic, has a nice famous one here for make me a sandwich. What? Make it yourself. Sudo, make me a sandwich. Okay. It's a way of saying I'm overriding the permissions, go and do it for me. A wonderful comic. I highly recommend you read it. Things people wish for, things that shooting stars can cause. Okay. They call this a comic of romance, sarcasm, math, and language. So take your pick, what interests you. Did we finish talking about a lot of stuff there? I assume a role, SCPs, lots of fun stuff there. Next question. Oh, no, we just did that one. Ooh, okay. Messages in flight for SQS Lambda trigger. I have SQS, which triggers Lambda. When I put a message in SQS, I'll put this one in chat so you can follow along if you want. What you describe is the same as using root in Linux all the time. Yeah, don't use root in Linux all the time. Not a good idea. You do things like rm, what's the old, people say rm-rf/, and then they wonder why their whole machine is not working, and it's because you just deleted the whole directory structure of your machine. So especially if you're running as root, that can cause massive damage. If you're running it as a normal user, hopefully you won't cause enough damage to totally destroy the machine. That's the magic skill command. rmrf/. I have an SQS that triggers Lambda. When I put a message in SQS, it shows the message in flight, and my Lambda is not able to process the message. My Lambda has the permissions, SQS, lots of SQS permissions. It also has permission to write to a log group. So when your Lambda function has some debug output or error messages, it gets sent to CloudWatch logs, and that's what this is presumably allowing. Also allow log streams and log events. That's how it must write to the log group. When I attach administrator access permissions, it works, and Lambda gets triggered. I'm not sure what permission I'm missing. SQS queue is unencrypted. Before we look at some things down the bottom, can you think what might be going on here? The thing that I noticed is they're saying I have an SQS that triggers Lambda. So a Lambda function with a trigger an SQS queue, which means when a message goes to SQS, it will trigger a Lambda function. The Lambda function gets past the event information in the event record. Let's have a look at that. Lots of Lambda today. And pick any random function. I can go to configure a test event, and I can say I'm pretending that I'm having an SQS message come in. So when an SQS message comes into Lambda, it passes the body of the message. It passes when it was created, which queue triggered it. There was a question a couple of days ago. I saw somebody said they've got one Lambda function being triggered by 2 SQS queues. How can they tell which queue triggered it? And the answer is they look at this event source ARN. So this person is saying, I have an SQS that triggers Lambda. Well, guess what? Lambda receives the message through the event record that comes through when you write your Lambda function. And there is no need to call SQS to say, get me a message, delete a message, because the Lambda service is doing that automatically. Image Lambda SQS. It looks a little bit like this. Oh, where's the pretty picture? It polls. So Lambda polls SQS and says, do you have a message for me? Oh, it doesn't have it. Oh, well, there's a pretty picture for it, with the hand literally going out and grabbing a message from SQS. So they don't have to add all of these permissions. So I added a comment here just earlier today. If SQS triggers the queue, the function should not call SQS. Instead, the message is passed through the event field. Can you tell us more about what your function is doing? So it's a bit strange that they're saying it works if the administrator access permission is there, but not otherwise. So they're doing something in their function that is a little bit strange. Maybe they're calling another AWS service that needs some permissions in there. RMRF won't work. Try RMRF */. RMRF won't work with a slash. I thought it's recursive. That's what the R stands for. This I always love talking about. I'm trying to access my EC2 instance configured with Elasticsearch from a configured Lambda function. I've added the Lambda function to the same VPC and security group as the EC2 instance. That's important. I'm not sure what's causing this. I've given EC2 full access permission from the Lambda function. So EC2 instance, Lambda function. And he wants the Lambda function to be able to talk to the EC2 instance. So he's put in the same VPC, same security group. Wrong. A lot of people think that security groups are like networks. And if you put something in the same subnet, they can talk to each other. True. But if you put things in the same security group, they cannot talk to each other. And let's do an experiment. We'll actually set this up. Always like playing around. Let's, I've got an instance here called ops that I can use. Let's launch another instance in the same VPC. We'll just call this, instead of ops, I'll call it ops2. Okay, so I have two EC2 instances, and they are both launching with the same security group. So the security group I've got defined on these two EC2 instances is allow some inbound rules. In fact, I might clean this up. These are various IP addresses that I've used from home. I'll show you a cute thing that I do. If I want to access this instance, I normally have no rules on my security group. And on my computer here, if I try to log into that particular instance, it sits there and it hangs forever. Hanging is a good indication your security group is wrong. So I have a little script where I can say, grab my current IP address. If you curl that address, it comes back and tells you what your public IP address appears to be to the outside world. And then I'm calling the AWS CLI and saying, please add these permissions to the security group. So we can see here that my security group is empty. If I run that particular command, it is now adding my IP address to this instance. So if I refresh, we can see that I now have one IP address here in my rules. I've added both SSH and RDP. So the security group on this instance allows me to log in from where I am in the AWS office. It does not allow connection from anywhere else. I have two instances using this connection, ops2 and ops, and ops2 has an IP address of that thing. So I'm logged into my first instance, and if I now want to connect to my second instance, it sits here and it hangs forever. Both of them are in the same security group, but they can't communicate because the rules for a security group apply individually to each instance in the security group. If you want to allow the two instances to talk to each other, then you've got to actually have the security group refer to itself, which can be quite a painful operation. I can come in here and say, I want to add an additional rule. I want to allow SSH from my ops win SG. So I'm in the ops win SG security group, ops windows. I have referred back to itself. Connect to itself. And now if I save that configuration, here I am on my first instance and I can connect to my second instance. Probably won't let me in because I'm not doing agent forwarding, but it did successfully connect that instance. So the general rule is two things in the same security group cannot communicate with each other unless there is a rule that says the security group can communicate with itself. It's not a boundary thing, it's a set of permissions that run on each instance individually. I will just take that off because I will forget about it otherwise. Okay, so I provide this answer earlier today. They should create two separate security groups. So the Lambda function should have a security group with no inbound, because Lambda, you don't communicate into a Lambda. Instead, give the Lambda the standard allow everything outbound. The EC2 instance should have a security group that allows inbound from the Lambda security group, and you can specifically reference the other security group. And the other thing he mentioned here, he gave the Lambda function EC2 full access permission, thinking that that will grant Lambda permission to access EC2 instances. No, this particular permission only grants the ability to call AWS APIs, things like launch instance, terminate instance, rather than permission to connect to instances. So totally irrelevant there. I should actually mention that, have you ever wondered why the commands for EC2 do not have a create instance? So there is no create instance command. Instead, you launch, you can, when you create an instance, you actually use this command called run instances. And nowhere else in the whole of AWS do we have this concept of run as a verb on your API calls. And what I think it is it's a callback to the old days of EC2. In the old days of EC2, you did not have persistent disk storage. There was no Amazon EBS. Thanks, Charlie. And you run an EC2 instance, and when you turn off the EC2 instance, you lose everything on it. So you've got to back up your data to S3. So there was the concept of running an instance and terminating an instance, but there was no concept of stopping an instance, because if you stop the instance, it loses the content of the disk. And I can probably explain that with an architecture diagram I used last week. And here it is. So this is inside an EC2 host. So in AWS, we have lots of computers in our data center. We have host machines. each host machine, oh, by the way, apparently they're all color coded. So all EC2 machines are one color, all SQS machines are another color. The host computer, every host runs only one type of instance. So if you want a T2 micro, this host might run only T2 micros. And the way it works is the machine itself has lots of CPUs and lots of RAM, and they can divide it up into smaller and smaller instances. So you might have one instance size that takes the whole host, or they can chop it in two and you get half the resources, chop it in four and get more resources, etc. So the resources are allocated to the individual instances. It is attached through the network to things like the internet and EBS, Elastic Block Store, which is the attached disk storage. I like to think of EBS as a USB disk you can plug in and attach, and you can detach it, plug it into another machine. But down here, we have this thing called Instant Store. And this used to be the only way that EC2 stored data. It's a directly attached disk, which means the host machine not only has the CPU and the RAM, it also has the disk. So when you turn on the instance, we gave you a disk. When you turned off the instance, we took that disk away to give it to somebody else. And therefore, you lose what is contained on that disk. Apparently, in the early days, we didn't do a good job of erasing it. So you might have even been able to see previous people's data. That has now been fixed. You will never see any data on a virtual disk that is given to you. So run instance meant give me an instance, and terminate instance meant throw away the instance. There was no start and stop command, because if you stop an instance, the disk is gone and there's no computer to turn it on again, so you can't start it. So instead of calling it create instances, it was called run instances, because that's the concept they had back then. So we're left with the historical naming concept of it being called run instances. Didn't you learn a lot from me? Okay, I think we did this one. So why could you not connect? We've done that. Data! Migrating 50 terabytes of data between regions. Oh boy. We're currently considering migrating 50 terabytes of S3 objects between different regions. Is there a way besides CLI migrating this amount of data? What would be the shortest way of doing so? Cross-region copy, says the elusive nose. Yeah, so the scary thing here, I like this comment here. It sounds like you could burn a hole in your pocket as cross-region copies data. So let's look at S3 pricing. Any AWS service that you communicate cross-region, the standard prices apply. There's an exception though. So all data going in from the internet to any service, no charge. Apparently in the early days there was a charge, but not these days. Any data going out from S3 to the internet, I'm going to change to the Sydney region because I'm in Sydney. Oh, it's more expensive. Always in US dollars, but more expensive. So I would pay 11.4 cents per gig going out there. But it looks like there is a different price between regions. So it looks like I would pay 9.8 cents to transfer data to a different region. Then we go to the USA, then we go to North Virginia. Normally 9 cents per gig. But look at this. If you are copying data from North Virginia to all of these different regions, it's dirt cheap. It's only 2 cents. And if you're copying to Ohio, which I believe is right next to North Virginia. Oh. That'll do. Where is my world geography? Oh, there it is. Ohio. Columbus, Ohio. So there is Ohio. Here is, where's North Virginia? Don't make it easy for us foreigners to find states here. North Virginia. I once learned all of the US states alphabetically, like Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Arizona, just to memorize the states of the USA because I thought it might be handy. So there's Ohio, there's US East 1, US East 2. So it's only 1 cent per gig to transfer data between them. So in a way, it's a good site using Ohio because it's close to US East 1. A lot of people also don't like US East 1 because it's the biggest region in AWS. It's where a lot of things get released first. And sometimes if there's something goes wrong, it's with the new stuff. So I like creating things in Ohio rather than North Virginia, simply because it's a good modern region that has lots of services and lots of support there. You want the city with the servers? Yeah, Ashburn. Ashburn is a very big IT area. We, of course, do not say where the AWS data centers are. Does Google know? Here's lots of data centers. Equinix, who are our... If you get a direct connect, you will go into an Equinix type location. Oh, we have various Amazon locations. I have no idea what these things are. IAD 71. I have no idea where our data centers are, and frankly, I don't want to know where they are, but it's interesting that Google seems to know where a lot of Amazon locations are. So can't comment on that. So if you are transferring from the USA to somewhere else, it looks like it is very low cost. What if I was to transfer from, say, Singapore? Normally 12 cents, 9 cents, not that great. What about Tokyo? Normally 11 cents, goes down to 9 cents. So it looks like only the USA has the low-cost pricing. I wonder if it's cheaper to then copy to the USA and then copy to the region of your choice. Probably wouldn't be worthwhile. Canada. Canada also has low-cost pricing. Very interesting. So we can ask which regions between very good. I was reading a study from Cloudflare saying that different Flare internet prices around the world. Good enough. Here it is, though. I think there is a newer version of this document. This is from 2014. And what Cloudflare, so it's Cloudflare is a content distribution network like CloudFront, and they do a lot of peering. Peering means they connect between other internet providers, so their traffic doesn't actually go across the real internet, it just goes quickly between various providers. And the more they can peer, the lower the cost. Effectively, they don't need to pay for the internet where they are peering connections. So in the USA, they've got 60% or 80% in the USA. In Europe, about 50%. So it makes it quite low. Asia, about 50%. Latin America, oh, something went wrong there. They're peering less over there. Australia. Australia is apparently the most expensive region because we have a small number of very big telecommunications companies. And if they say we don't want to peer with you, you've then got to pay their exorbitant rates to do internet connections. So the cost for services like Cloudflare and AWS data transfer is a lot more than elsewhere. Effective price, look at this. Europe, $5. North America, $8. Australia, $100. So it's gotten better since then, but it's still very expensive. So another thing that worries me with this question is 50 terabytes. You can go down the road to Best Buy and buy a hard disk. It's amazing what hard disks. I'll go for USA. I don't have Best Buy in Australia, but I'll just use them to give some examples. Let's go for a hard disk in terabytes. What is the typical cost for a hard disk these days? We have a 5 terabyte disk for 175. These are all packaged. Why don't we just go for raw disks? Where's a good place to buy raw hardware in the USA? Amazon hard disk 5 terabytes, let's say. Give me the actual raw disk, not the package. 2 terabytes for $60. 1 terabyte, $50. Newegg. Oh yeah, Newegg is really good. Let's go for components. Disk storage, memory, motherboard, CPU. Oh, I don't want to say that I'm in Australia. Go away. Hard drives. Let's go for desktop internal hard drives. Good 5¼ inch. So we have 2 terabytes for 50. Terabyte for 45, 4 terabytes for 90. It's not that low cost. Here at 16 terabytes for 372. 372 divided by 16, $20-ish per terabyte, which is just incredible. Incredible how low cost some of these things are. I used to buy floppy disks from my Mac, and it cost about $5 for a 1 megabyte floppy disk. Anyway. So you can get storage for about $20 per terabyte. It's fantastic. The problem is a lot of people don't realize how big a terabyte is. A terabyte is a lot of data. Your machine can probably copy a 1 gig file pretty fast, but a terabyte is 1,000 gigs, and it takes a long time to copy, even on your own computer between devices. So if you've got to pump that across a network, it takes even longer. Network bandwidth calculator. I've got a good one that I saved in my pinboard. Bandwidth. Synology bandwidth exceeded. Nope. Network band. It'll figure out what I mean. How long does it take to transfer data based upon your connection? So let's say I have a 100 gigabit line. So let's say you've got a modern network that's running at 100 gigs a second, 100 gigs per second. Then I want it to tell me how long something takes to transfer. If you can get to it without downloading S3, oh, that's interesting. Cloud, and we'll talk about Snowmobile as well and all that. Download time calculator, that should do. This is great. So if you're looking at your typical speed, let's say you've got your own network that's running at 100 Ethernet, running at 100 gigabits per second, and I want to transfer 50 terabytes, which is 50,000 gigabytes. It's saying it will take, what is that, a day? It's saying it'll take 1.5 days to transfer or something. So even across your own network, where's that an hour? Hours, minutes, seconds. I'm confused here. 71 minutes, 1 hour? Yeah, that almost makes it too good. Too good. Anyway, 50 terabytes is a lot of data. And if you're paying, let's say 50 terabytes, which is 50,000 gig, times that 9 cents, that can cost you $4,500 of network traffic if you're copying between expensive regions. So what alternatives do we have? You do indeed have the ability to use AWS Snow. So the Snow products are quite cute. We have the Snowball, which these days is 80 terabytes of disk storage. You've actually got two of them. You've got compute optimized and storage optimized. Snowball can run local Lambda functions on these boxes. They're quite good. And the storage optimized ones, Snowball data transfer, edge transfer, storage optimized devices. How big are they? How big are they? Terabytes. Too hard reading the doc. Snowballs come in two sizes, 50 terabytes and 80 terabytes. So they could indeed get a Snowball. One problem with the Snowball is you can't ship it outside a country. So if they just wanted to transfer between two regions within one country, sounds great. You could export a Snowball. Now here's the fun thing. When you create a Snowball job, you say, please export my S3 bucket to Snowball. But then they ship you the Snowball, and you'd effectively have to ship the Snowball back to a different region. I don't think they'll actually allow you to do that. So Snowball probably isn't an option. There is, of course, the big Snowmobile that has, I think it's 100 petabytes of data in your big truck. So they'll come up, they plug in a power generator, they plug in the fiber optics, and you can transfer lots of data on there. And we recently introduced the Snow Cone, which is a portable hard disk, effectively. It can run off batteries as well. And it contains less data. How much does it contain? It doesn't say. 8 terabytes of usable storage. So, yeah, okay, you can go down to the shops and 8 terabytes will cost you about $180, but this is great for transferring data up into S3 or out of S3. Another service, we have something called Data Sync, which could be interesting. So Data Sync is used to transfer data in and out of AWS. It's effectively like running your own BitTorrent client. It fully utilizes the bandwidth. I think it uses UDP, so there's less error correction. You get through the data a lot faster. And it can be a great way to transfer on-premise data up into the cloud. So that's Data Sync. But yes, you could also use it to transfer between regions. So in the question, they're asking, should I use the AWS CLI? So the problem with the AWS CLI is if you've got thousands of files, it can get a little confused as to which files it's synced and which ones it's copied. So let's write some things here. A few options. If your regions are in the same country, the data transfer rather than using the Data Sync. AWS Data Sync. This is the format in Markdown to put links in your comments. And what does Data Sync do? Makes it simple and fast to move large amounts of data between on-premise storage and S3. Don't think snowball. Any other things we can offer here aside from Data Sync, Snowball? I'm going to make it bold. Any other services? Probably it. Excellent. Let's look at some live questions, see if there's any questions that have been asked over the past hour that we can answer here. Why do you need roles as opposed to groups to access resources in AWS? Brad says, when Snowball was recommended to us, they said that they'd ship it to us. We fill it up and send it back and gets loaded to S3. That means they're willing to load into S3 from Snowball. Right. Yes. So Snowball, when you request it, I don't know if I can request it on my account. Let's have a look. What would happen? The Snow Family. Sounds like a series of books. You create a job. Ooh. Yeah. You create a job and you pick a country. It looks like I am currently in the Sydney region, so I can only select Australia as the destination country. That's interesting. Does that mean you can pick different countries from different regions? You can import into S3. AWS will ship an empty device to you for storage and compute workloads. You transfer data onto it, ship it back. AWS will load it in. You can export from S3 and you can dump it locally. So it's a good way to get your data out of AWS. Or, especially the Snowball family, have local compute. So you might be on a ship, let's say, and you want to be able to store data and run some Lambda functions on that. You can literally have the device on the ship doing compute and storage, and when you're finished, you just ship it back to AWS and upload the data. Or I've heard stories of cars like the cars that go around and do street view type views, collecting all of that data. Rather than uploading it, they have a Snowball device in the truck, in the car. They load all of the pictures onto there and then just ship it straight to AWS, and the data gets uploaded quite nicely. Whereas you're saying if the person asking the questions can ship it, should it work? They do not need cross-region. So there are restrictions on where. Let's jump to go to Europe. Let's say we go to Ireland. Where can you ask a snowball to be shipped? From Ireland. Oh, interesting. So from Ireland, they do allow snowballs to be shipped to Europe. So even though we don't have a region in Slovakia, you can ship a snowball there, send it back to Ireland, and it will get the job done. That's really useful. And if I pick London, we'll give a similar list. Come on, London. Come in, London. Yep. And last one I'll try is what happens if you go to Singapore in the middle of Asia Pacific. Singapore is a rather small island. I don't know how they have 3 AZs just stored within Singapore. Like you can drive across Singapore in half an hour. It's not a very big city. So redundancy for availability zones within Singapore, you'd have to stick one right on the end and then one on the other end and maybe one sticking out on these islands. I don't know how they do multiple data centers in Singapore. Good on them. I spent a week one time at a conference down here in Sentosa. Sentosa is an island where they have golf course, Universal Studios, water parks, lots of great things down there. Okay, we changed that question, did we? I'm trying to understand why you need IAM roles to access resources in a different IAM account and why AWS just can't do the same things. Now, this sounds very familiar to me to a question that was asked recently. So I'm just going to click on that username and have a look at the questions they've asked. And indeed, what can you do IAM roles you can't do with IAM groups that they asked a couple of weeks ago? I participated a great deal on trying to answer this to their satisfaction. I gave some very nice answers here. And there was lots more back and forth, and Bennett here did not seem to be satisfied with the answers I gave. So I'm not going to attempt to answer this person anymore, but I highly invite any of you to try and explain to them where it is. Whenever I ask people this question, the conversation goes in circles. To grant access to a resource in another account, you give them permission to assume a role and then grant that role access to your resources. Me, I understand that, but why can't you just create an IAM group that can access that resource and then add those users from the other account into the group? Them. You can't add users from another AWS account to your group. That was me in the other question when I said that. Then they say, I understand that, but why does AWS only let you do crossover account permissions like that by using roles? Why wouldn't it make just as much sense for the... Anyway, if any of you want to attempt to answer this question, you are most welcome to try and convince them of what the correct answer is. I won't do that. Monkey asks, what's the purpose of running Snowball Lambda local functions? So Lambda boat. Sorry, I'll see if I can find this. Lambda University boat and science. I saw a great article. Maybe it's in these case studies of a company that was doing exactly that. They wanted remote compute on a boat that doesn't have internet connections, but they wanted to do a whole lot of calculations. Now you could run, I guess, EC2 instances on a Snowball, but EC2 then has the operating system and how do you load it and copy data off and all that. Instead, they've implemented Lambda functions. And I think you've got to create the Lambda function in the region, but then it gets shipped onto the Snowball device. And the great thing is because Snowball is based around S3 storage, as soon as you add a file to it, it can trigger a Lambda function. The Lambda function could then process the file and do a lot of initial data collection. I've also heard of it being used on the wind farms. So they're collecting a lot of stats about the wind farm, storing lots of data. They don't have internet connections because they're off somewhere windy. And so once a month or whatever, they just go and collect the snowballs and bring back the data. But the Lambda function on there can analyze the data as it's coming in, maybe throw away information that is not interesting, maybe send an alert when there is interesting data that comes through. So there is many use cases that people seem to like the idea of having compute and storage on their own devices. And this, of course, is not to be confused with AWS Outposts. Outposts is the service that you can pay us lots of money and get a rack installed in your own data center. And that can run servers like EC2, IDS, EBS. That, of course, is not a mobile device. I mentioned before that you pay us a lot of money. And the reason for that is instead of an EC2 instance, you just pay as you go. So give us 12 cents an hour or something like that. When you don't want it, you can turn it off. Outposts has the bigger host computers. So you don't just get a T2 micro, you get a host that runs maybe 96 T2 micros on it. Plus you pay for it for, I think, 3 years. So some of these prices can be quite high, but they compare favorably to buying traditional IT infrastructure that you would install in your own data center. The benefit is that Outposts can, it's a fully managed service where you just use the standard AWS interface to create your EC2 instances, your IDS instances, and it magically happens on premises. And then you've got very low latency connections between Outposts in your own data center and your own other IT devices. So I know the stock market type people love having low latency connections to do automated buying and selling of stocks. They're the sorts of people who would like Outposts. There's an outpost. There's one worth more than $1 million. Let's try and find it. All up front. We want all up front. We'll look at this last column. Woohoo! What is this? This is a R5, which has lots of memory, 24x large. Let's see what an R5 24x large has. It has 96 CPUs, 768 gigs of memory. And what does it normally cost? Yes, I have shortcuts for most everything on AWS. R5 24 extra large would normally cost you $6 an hour. So use it for $6 an hour, but if you want to buy it as Outposts, let's do a quick calculation. $6 and let's call it $6.05 per hour. 24 hours, that's a day, times 365 is a year, times 3 is 3 years. I think this is 3-year pricing. I'm not sure. And that would cost you, I get that right? Only $158,000? So why is it so much more expensive there? No, it's 12. It's 12 of them. So multiply that by 12 and we get 1.2 million. I don't know if it's 3 year. Let's say it's 1 year. It would be 635. 3-year term and 3 payment options. If you choose, the monthly charge will be over 3-year term. I don't know if that means it's for 3 years or 1 year. But yes, it's a lot of money. Oh, under Australia, it would be even more expensive. So good value, but yes, that's what IT costs. You know, I saw a great film one time called Brazil. It was weird, but I now appreciate it more since having seen it. And it's by one of the Monty Python people. That's not, yes, this is it. So it's set in a dystopic society where the enemy of the state, blah, blah, blah. So it's set in this old-fashioned era, and you can see what the world was like back then when they had rooms full of accountants. I'll see if I can find a picture of it. There's this great scene where they showed what it was like to do accounting there. They literally had hundreds of people lined up in a room doing work by pencil. And it made me appreciate that computers these days, you know, one computer can replace literally 100 people sitting there doing lots of work in an office. That's weird. So IT is worth a lot of money. You know, you can't have a bank with millions of customers if you're working everything by hand. So IT, while it might cost money, it can also provide some great resources there. There's a great scene in this movie where this bureaucrat received incorrectly an order for something like 1,000 meal trays, and they were filling up his office, and he didn't know what to do with it. And he realized, hold on, I work for the government, we get free postage. So he started mailing out these food trays, empty meal trays, to all the citizens in the country. And that's how he got rid of all the meal trays. So highly recommend this movie called Brazil. Bit weird, but good fun. Why are workspaces with GPU exponentially costlier than no GPU? You're talking about AWS workspaces? Free? So I recently have been using workspaces to do, if I can spell it right, pricing. Yes. So workspaces is where you get a Windows machine that is always running in the cloud, that you can also have it turn off when not being used to save money. And it's an extension to your own desktop. Jeff Barr loves using workspaces. So from his computer at home, he logs in and he has his remote desktop. He often has some nice pictures of it here. Where are you, Jeff? Where's your workspaces desktop? And he's got lots of screens attached to it, and all his work is done in the cloud. So if he goes somewhere else, he just needs a computer to connect to his workspace in the cloud, and he can connect up and do all the compute there. Or I have a Macintosh. If I want to run Windows software, I can spin up a workspace and do it. Why don't you use an EC2 instance? A workspace uses Terabytes technology to give you a remote desktop. You can forward your sound ports, your microphones, even I think printer type things. It's an alternate way of working, giving you a remote desktop. And the pricing varies. There's the size of the machine, how many CPUs, how much memory, etc. you have. But we do indeed have some machines that have some GPUs. Graphics Pro machines. Oh, here we are. Windows bundle options. Window bring your own. Performance, Power Pro. Go under here. Graphics. So normally a workspace might cost you about $100 a month. If you go, for the graphics one, it's $700 a month, $1,000 a month. GPUs are expensive. That's the only thing I can offer here. And wow, yep, that's expensive. I think they use the Tesla T-Series Tesla GPU. Newegg Tesla T-Series 100 T4. Whoa, $2,000 for a Tesla graphics card doing lots of GPU. GPUs are amazing because they do great things offloading the main CPU for doing lots of graphics, and then people realized, oh, we can write things like Bitcoin miners and other software that, or machine learning works fantastic on one of these things. And so they're all the rage now, and Imdb has gone tremendously out of the increase in popularity for GPUs. Brad says, I might have something to do with the graphics card manufacturers. A data center grade GPU that lets you virtualize GPU power is several times the price of a consumer grade one with the same power. Oh. So the question is, are you sharing a GPU with other people, or are you having that one per user, which would indeed explain a lot of cost being involved in there. Linus said foo to NVIDIA. I met Linus Torvalds one time. Didn't appreciate who he was at the time. It was a long time ago. And frankly, he's just this guy, you know. He's just a standard meek person. He doesn't really do any programming these days. He just oversees other people trying to submit code into the Linus kernel. There's a great video on YouTube where Linus explains how Linux is pronounced. And he says something like, hello, my name is Linus Torvalds, and I pronounce Linux as Linux. And that solves all the arguments about how it should be named. Talking about storage transfer, here's a fun one. I'm creating a type of flashcard application using React Native. The flashcard deck contains 5,000 MP3 files. I want the user to be able to download the entire deck when they first use it. Currently, I'm downloading each file using published stories, but it's slow. Some downloads time out. Is there a place I can download an entire folder of MP3 files instead of downloading them individually? And I added a question there. Is there a reason why you want to download them? Because if you're just using a web app, why can't it just point to the MP3 files in the cloud and use them on demand? Here's an example of a bad answer. So this answer says, did you check this out? And it's not really an answer saying, here's a solution. And it was closed by somebody. It does not provide an answer. To critique or request clarification from an author, leave a comment below the post. So the question was, the answer was deleted. So if you want to ask follow-up questions like I did here, add a comment. If you want to provide what you think is an answer, then you can add it as an answer. You could do a zip file to download all these things. I'm just worried how big these files would be and how slow it would be to download initially. Let's check any recent questions that have come up in the last hour. Why do you need roles? We looked at that one. Securely define password using Terraform. I'm not a Terraform person. DynamoDB step functions. Protected routes if my app is hosted on S3 CloudFront. Ooh. They fixed it already. Concurrent exceptions in glue. Docker. Persisting raw format is good or not? I think I've seen those questions before. So I'll go back to my pre-prepared ones. Oh yes, I thought we'd have a bit of a play here. It's not that question necessarily, but there was a question about, maybe it was, yes, this is the one. I'm trying to download a file from FTP using blah blah in Lambda, but the maximum disk space available to a Lambda function is 512 meg. Is there a way to download the file of 1 gig in Lambda? So it's true. The /temp directory in Lambda is 512 meg only. Somebody suggests you could stream it, so you might download, and as you're downloading it, sending it to S3, so you're not actually storing it in Lambda. Or Chris, you online, Chris, watching any of this? Probably not. He's in the UK, and the time there is 2 a.m., so Chris probably isn't watching. AWS introduced Lambda support for EFS, and you can mount EFS on your Lambda functions. So this means you can have persistent disk storage, and all Lambda functions can access the storage. I've never tried that, so I thought, what can go wrong? What can go wrong with a live demo with all of you helping me? What do we talked about here today? Says Penda. My name is John, and we are answering AWS questions on Stack Overflow. It's whatever people happen to come along and ask things about. I like to try it out. Let's try out some of these things. So first of all, we can create an elastic file system. I know that elastic file systems are specific to availability zones. I'll call this my Stack elastic file system. Going into territory I've never used before. Oh, is that it? I didn't tell it how big to make my EFS file system because it automatically expands to fill the space necessary. So you don't have to tell it how big. It says it's got a 6K file system, and that's it. Is that all you have to do to run EFS? Is it really that simple? Attach. Okay, so that's going to show me how to attach things. That's great. Well, maybe that is all you need to do. Let's create a Lambda function. EFS Python. And I would like to see whether I can access that EFS volume from Lambda. World first. So how do I configure this Lambda to use EFS? I want to connect it to my default VPC. I'll connect it to a subnet in zone A. I can put rules on security groups. I don't really mind what security group I use. So I have connected my Lambda function to, apparently I've got to connect it to multiple. I'm going to put it in A. We recommend you choose at least 2. Does that mean it requires 2? Nope. So I've got it in A. Where do I attach my thing? Lambda is not designed to process large amounts of data. Even if those files can be downloaded into EFS, Lambda is still memory limited. Yeah, specific use cases only. How do we add EFS onto, file system? We will choose a file system, the one that I just created. We will choose an access point. An access point is used to mount a network file system and integrates with IAM to control access. So it looks like I have to create an access point. Here it is, access point. Create an access point. My file system, EFS access point. Oh my gosh, what's all this stuff I have to fill in? Optional, optional, optional. I'll create an access point. No idea what it does. Let's refresh. I now have an access point. And we'll mount it on mount EFS. And it doesn't like me. Start with Imdb an absolute file path. Who knows what that means? Can't do it. Let's look for a blog post. Add access point. Lots of confusing screens. Path /EFS. Create file system. See, what can I tell you? Do things live. Look, they use /mount /EFS as well. And that should have worked. Maybe my access point's not good enough. What a shame. That would have been fun to do. Have to read the blog. Oh, save is lit up now. That was not lit up before, was it? It was really, really not lit up. Okay. So I now have a file system attached. I don't know where it's listed here anymore. I have a file system which is attached to /mnt /mount /EFS. Let's write a Lambda function that uses that. Python. Who programs from scratch? Everyone uses Google to figure out how to create things. Let's create a file. Lambda function. File object. So we will create it in mount EFS cheese.txt. Fantastic. And we'll do write mode. Fantastic. And let's do an F. F equals open /mount /EFS cheese.txt. Appendable write. Sounds good. We'll just copy their sample code that should write some data into that file. And we will then close it. Thank you very much. Random page on the internet that has helped me do it. I save that. I test it. This is where you can pass through event data. I don't need it, so I will just choose the default settings. And if I click the test button, does it generate any errors? Taken a while. The function couldn't connect to EFS with access point. Check your network configurations. I'm going to leave it there and say I don't know enough about this, and if any of you want to learn how to do EFS, read this blog article and it will probably tell you stuff about network operating systems that I do not understand. So good attempt at answering this question. I will let the author try for themselves. Report on your security group. I probably want to close the file after the 4. Yeah. I don't know what's going on there. If any of you can figure that out, congratulations. I wanted to show a few things. I gave a show yesterday called Developers Let's Code, and it's in my YouTube channel. I'll just give it a plug. And I spent an hour giving an overview of lots of things to do with Python. So if you're interested, here is a link to that show that I did yesterday. You can find on YouTube in my CQ channel. But a few fun things that I did in there, just want to show you. I had an example. Let's go for this inventory system. Just to give a few examples of how Lambda can be used in your various code. I have a web page here, which is connecting to DynamoDB. It logs in through Cognito, it connects to DynamoDB, and retrieves some inventory data. And just give you the demo of it rather than going in depth into how it works. I have a bucket here, and I can say, delete the files that are currently in there. Purely by uploading a file from my machine into S3, I'm uploading something from Shanghai. And I say upload in here. That is triggering a Lambda function, which is then loading the contents of the file into a DynamoDB table. So if I come back to my inventory page and refresh, it comes up and says, hey, you've got some stuff from Shanghai. And I come in here and upload another file. Let's upload a file from Karachi. That again is triggering the Lambda function, loading things in DynamoDB. I come to my inventory and now I have two stores of data. So really nice use case of how you can use a S3 trigger to fire off a Lambda function, which then goes into DynamoDB. And if I look at my tables, I have an inventory table where the data is that was loaded from those files, Karachi and Shanghai. So, you know, when people say what they don't quite understand what Lambda is for, it's that event-driven activity that put things in S3 and then fire off other code that can run there. And another one that is fun is Poly. I can get this demo going for you. Fantastic. This is a page out of S3 that can call API Gateway, and it will then call Poly. And the flow is a little bit like this, nice and complex. The S3 page, I can give it some text. So here is an S3 page. Now is the time for all good developers to write some Lambda. Fantastic. And I click this button, and it is in the background doing a dynamic HTML call to API Gateway. And it's coming in here and it's storing the text that I typed in DynamoDB, triggering another Lambda function that goes into DynamoDB, retrieves that text, calls Amazon Poly, and should translate into an MP3 file and store it in an S3 bucket. And if I come in here and say, show me the results, it then says, oh, it's already processed it. And I don't have my sound configured here. If I turn up my laptop really loud, you'll hopefully hear it.
Now is the time for all good developers to write some Lambda.
So another good example of just serverless application running with API Gateway, Lambda, calling Poly, dumping things in S3. Of course, Lambda you only pay for when you use it, so fractions of a second to do a lot of that, and at very low cost. I always like doing things in funny languages as well. Let's get the Swedish chef to read English. If you pass Swedish writing to the Swedish voice, it will say it correctly. But if you ask a Swedish voice to read stuff in English, then it will come back in a very strange way. Let's see what will happen here. I could almost understand that.
Now is the time for all good developers.
That's all right.
Now is the time for all good developers to write some Lambda.
So there. Lots of fun things you can do with Lambda. Cool. Let's pick another question and we'll call it quits for the day. best way to download it. We've done that one. Cross-region. EFS we've played with. How do you replace a key with a key? Generating thumbnails. Oh, that's another demo to show you actually. I saw this question come up and I said, oh, this code looks extremely familiar to me because I just yesterday did a demo where it was based on this thing. This is a standard demo in the documentation for Lambda to show you how to trigger things off S3. And you'll notice here it gets the bucket, it gets the key, it creates a path, and it goes to a resized path. And I looked at the Lambda question, the Stack Overflow question, it had exactly the same code in there. But it was not working for them. And it complained that they couldn't write to this really, really long directory. And the cause was actually the fact that when they copied the code from here, they didn't use a command here that replaces all the slashes with nothing, so it doesn't have to create subdirectories. But I thought I would give you a demo of how that works, in case you've never seen Lambda resizing things. I also have two buckets here. I have a bucket called Let's Code Lambda and Let's Code Lambda Resized. And both of these two buckets are empty. Look, nothing behind the scenes. I can come in here and I can upload a file. A picture of maybe a Genius bar at Apple. And if I look in my first bucket and I say, show me what that picture looks like, there's your picture of things. I was using this for recognition to recognize faces. And if I go into my second bucket, which was empty, but now I hit the refresh button, we see that a new file is in there with the same name. If I go back to the first bucket, we can see that it was created at 11:50. That's my time here in Sydney, 11:50, 18 seconds. The second file was created at, whoa, that's fast. No, I'm looking in the wrong bucket. This is my resized bucket. So the first file was created at 11:50, 18 seconds. This file was created 11:50, 20 seconds. So 2 seconds later, Lambda created a file for me. And if I look at this particular file, it is a smaller thumbnail of that bigger picture. How did you do it? The sample code simply gives it uses a library called Pillow, and looks like it gets the name of the bucket and key. It downloads it locally, resizes, and then uploads to the other bucket. And the resize command is simply saying, hey, create me a thumbnail of this particular size. So really easy way to manipulate your graphics images. I know a lot of websites, they like to have smaller versions of objects, and getting Lambda to generate them as the picture is uploaded is a much better way than once a day having to go through and batch create all of their things. They were my Lambda demos. I think we'll call it quits there. So hopefully you've learned a thing or two here. I've not quite learned how to use EFS on a Lambda function. I'm going to go off and read that blog post and figure out what I did wrong there. But yeah, the best way to learn AWS is to experiment, try things. You never know what's going to happen out there, and you can learn things. Let's see if my reputation's gone up since I've been talking to you. Ended with 784. If I refresh this page, my reputation did not go up since I last loaded this page. So thank you very much. And if you ever land on Stack Overflow, I highly encourage you to upvote some questions that have helped you, or some answers that have helped you. I'd also like to encourage you to answer questions on Stack Overflow, which can be quite a fun process. And I'll be back online in 2 weeks' time. Next week we have an online Amplify Days event that's taking this time slot. But I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks for popping in. Thanks, Penda. And go build. See you later. Thanks.